Hey guys, what is up? SuperKmanrocks here, and we are here for my LCS Week 3 overview, analysis, and of course, at the end, my updated power rankings. We're really starting to get into the thick of things when it comes to the LCS, and with basically every region, we're starting to find out who some of the top teams in the world and in the region are, who's overperforming, who's underperforming, and who might need to make some, adjustments in terms of their play style to kind of adapt here. We're really starting to get a good idea as to what these teams are looking like as we move further on into the season, and Week 3 was certainly no different. If you are excited for this video, let me know down in the comment section below, what game were you most looking forward to this week? There were actually quite a few really good options, either of FlyQuest games, either of Evil Genius's games. I think we're all really solid. Both teams having very difficult weeks, I would say, overall for both of them, and so definitely interesting to see what happens there. But let me know what game you were most looking forward to, of course, down in the comment section below. But without further ado, let's go ahead and jump right into it. Of course, if you are new here, what we're going to be doing is going over all 10 games that happen in the LCS here in week number 3, going game by game, talking about the pros, the cons, the player of the game, the dud of the game in all 10 of them. And then at the end, of course, giving you my updated power rankings and how I view all of the teams. So without further ado, let's go ahead and jump right into it. We're going to start off with day number 1, and kicking off day number 1 was a classic matchup here in the LCS. We had TSM taking on Cloud9, the two probably biggest rivals in LCS history. And to the surprise of no one, Cloud9 is able to take the game here in 2023. Cloud9 is the better team, and they absolutely proved it in this game. This is a very eclectic draft, I would say. Nocturne Galio has definitely been picking up attention over the course of the past few weeks. We've seen a lot of teams in a lot of different regions go towards that Galio in the mid lane, whether that's with Nocturne in the jungle, whether that's with something like the Kindred in the jungle. Galio is definitely rising in priority in order to enable carry-oriented junglers. This was something that I was kind of interested to see if it was going to happen. We have so many good carry junglers in solo queue and at high-level solo queue, even in Champions queue. We're seeing carry-oriented junglers be incredibly successful. They just haven't necessarily translated to the pro level. I was wondering if we were going to see kind of a moving away from these more aggressive mid lane matchups that we have been seeing much more often than we did last year, and move into some potential carry-oriented jungle matchups like, Nocturne, like Kindred, things in that vein. Obviously, they are a little bit more feast or famine, but when you have a player like Blabber, that can absolutely work. But as much as I want to talk about Blabber, and as much as I want to talk about the Nocturne and Galio being incredibly successful this game, which they were, do not get me wrong. Blabber's 1-0-15, Diplex 3-1-12. Obviously, score doesn't say everything, but what that does show me is that they were on the map, they were doing a lot. But this was a really easy choice for player of the game. It's going to go to Berserker on the Zeri. He's actually been very good to start the season. I know we haven't really talked about him all that much because topside has kind of been the big winning spot, I would say, overall for Cloud9, with Fudge really genuinely being a top MVP candidate in the league right now, right next to Prince. And then Blabber obviously playing really well. They wanted to get Diplex acclimated. Bot lane has definitely taken a little bit of a backseat in terms of the resources that they've been able to get over the course of the beginning of the year, but they've been able to do super well at being able to go relatively even early on in games, even if sometimes they are down 5 or 10 CS because of a little bit of jungle attention. They usually are able to translate that into a relatively neutral mid game, and then Berserker's obviously one of the best team fighters in the entire region, and it's not particularly close. This time, Berserker does actually get a lot of attention from this Nocturne. They really want to invest into this bottom lane. He gets on his signature Zeri pick. I'm going to say it's his signature at this point, especially after last year's playoffs. I think at this point, it's very easy to talk about Berserker as a Zeri main. There are a couple of players in North America that I would consider Zeri-oriented. Berserker, in my opinion, definitely one of them, at least at the pro level. Not that he can't play other things, just that this is the champion that when Berserker's on it, you have to be incredibly scared. And yeah, that was absolutely worthwhile in this game. Neo gets super far behind in the early laning phase. Berserker and Sven in particular do a really good job of poking him out and making sure that the Lucian can't really play early, which is just not how this matchup is supposed to go. And then Berserker does a fantastic job translating that into the mid to late game. Obviously, a fantastic pentakill coming in later from Berserker in this game. Just genuinely looking good, looking fantastic. I would say this is his best game of the split so far, which is saying something because I do think that he has been incredibly good over the course of the first couple of games, but it felt like the reins were finally being taken off of him as opposed to the first couple of series this year where it really did kind of feel like he was I don't want to say being shackled down, but being trapped a little bit by the rest of his team. Fudge and Blabber were still good. Blabber in particular paired up with Diplex really well. That's something that I really do want to see more of. Obviously, Blabber's been playing a lot towards topside at the beginning of the year. Fudge has been getting a ridiculous amount of resources for Cloud9. He's been doing really well with those resources, but it is worth noting that he is, very resource heavy, or at least he has been over the course of the first few games. Blabber, on the other hand, I think I really want to see if he can play towards Diplex in the same way that he played towards Jensen, in that they were kind of a symbiotic relationship. There were games where Jensen was going to get resources that they really wanted to get his lane pushing and his lane ahead so that he could help move Blabber around the map. Or, in this game, and this is more likely what I think is going to happen more often, you put Diplex on a roamer, a more supportive pick that he can really help out Blabber play with. And I really think the Galio Nocturne was a good sign for me when it came to Cloud9. I was a little bit concerned through the first couple of games with how Diplex was acclimating to the rest of this team, to how he was playing early on. Not that he was particularly bad, just that he wasn't exactly a standout member, and he was, kind of getting bodied a little bit in some of the 1v1 mid lane matchups, but I thought he played a lot better in this game. Maple had a pretty decent game here on the Rise, which we'll talk about, but I don't think that was at the expense of Diplex. So overall, Blabber, Diplex, and especially Berserker I thought were really good. Sven played like an absolute madman at points in this game, stepping up so far in the Lulu in a lot of these team fights, but you can get away with that when you're Lulu sometimes, especially when the enemy team has a Zeri and you have a Galio. You have so many things that you have to worry about. You've got a Jackson, a Nocturne diving on top of your backline. You have so many things to worry about. It's very difficult to prioritize the Lulu in that instance. So overall, I think Cloud9 played really, really well, and just continue to kind of roll. I know their loss to FlyQuest wasn't exactly the most exhilarating thing in the world, but this is still a top 2 team or a top 3 team in the region at the very worst, in my opinion, and they proved that again here. As for TSM, could have been worse, I guess. It certainly wasn't a great loss from them. They certainly didn't necessarily look like they were on the same level as a team like Cloud9, but you had some players that were stepping up. I thought Maple made some really good plays in a lot of these early team fights on Rise. He was playing incredibly aggressive, posturing very aggressively. He was doing a lot of damage, was able to get it out. He just didn't really have any backup because his AD carry wasn't hurting. Credit to Chime, he was hitting bubbles. Like, he was actively playing well. I think Maple and Chime continue to look like probably the most consistent members of this TSM team, but Solo with some good engages. I think Boogie had a little bit of a rough one on the Sejuani. He definitely got out-jungled and out-pressured by Blabber. I thought he was one of the worst performing members, but it was a really easy choice for dead of the game, in my opinion, because Neo just got absolutely destroyed in the bot lane matchup. Not only was he super far behind by the mid game, which just shouldn't happen on the Lucian. You should never really be in a spot where, as Lucian, you could justify losing to Zeri basically isolated in the 2v2. That really isn't something that I would think would be a very good sign for how you played the laning phase. But even more so than that, Lucian's big power spike is that mid game, is these fights around, 10 to 15 minutes into the game. Neo wasn't taking any of them, and even when he was doing such minuscule damage that it was almost irrelevant that they had an AD carry, that they had a Lucian in this game, and that was problematic. So Neo's going to get my dud of the game here. He has been kind of meh, I would say, overall to start the year. He's had some okay performances, but for the most part, he definitely looks like the weak link of the team, which we kind of thought he would be going into the year. I think Boogie's also been very up and down. Outside of Chime, I don't really think that they have somebody on this team that I'm really confident is like playoff caliber. Chime is a playoff caliber support. He's a really solid player, but he can only do so much in that bot lane. And then Maple has had a couple of really good games to start the season, but he wasn't particularly phenomenal last year. And with all the mid lane competition, I don't think he's necessarily a big carry threat from that role like a lot of the other teams have. And then Solo's just Solo in the top lane. No offense to him, but he's just not going to dominate games in a way that's going to drag you to playoffs. This team definitely still has some major question marks for me, especially if the bot lane continues to struggle, because I do think that that was where they were able to generate a lot of advantages last year when they started going on their run, was Spica realizing, let's just try and get our bot lane ahead as much as possible. Spica and Chime working well together. I don't think Chime and Boogie have the same kind of chemistry, and so I am a little bit worried about TSM. I do think that there are things that they can do to kind of get back on the right track, but losing to C9 isn't the worst thing in the world. It just kind of raises some question marks about how sustainable it is that you are sitting here around 500. And then for Cloud9, another good win, good bounce back after that loss to FlyQuest. Not that it's particularly surprising that you were able to take down TSM. It's just a good sign with Berserker really stepping up and looking good. Blabber has another really solid game. I think Cloud9 is the team we all thought they were. They are very similar to last year, and that is a good thing. I think that obviously this is a team that won LCS last year. I do think the level of LCS has increased, substantially over the course of the offseason. We've seen that in FlyQuest, but for now, Cloud9 definitely deserves to still be considered one of the best teams in the entire region. Moving on to our second game of the week, and It's another banger. It's another matchup between two teams right at the top of the standings. We had FlyQuest taking on Evil Geniuses, and FlyQuest continues to remain undefeated. They continue to remain unbeatable up until this point. They look utterly fantastic in this game. A couple of mistakes. I say unbeatable. They do show a little bit of cracks in the armor in this one, but still looking pretty good overall, and definitely showing a lot more than I think people were expecting at the beginning of the year. They basically have gone on a perfect streak through the first 5 games of the season, as they really haven't shown too many weaknesses outside of a few hiccups here and there. Player of the game was actually kind of hard here because I think quite a few people played relatively well. I think you could give it to Impact in the top lane. Certainly you could give it to him. You could give it to Spica in the jungle, but for me, I am going to give it to Prince in the bottom lane here on the Caitlyn. He continues his MVP level pace. He continues his destruction of the LCS. He continues to look like the best player in the region pretty much without any sort of parallel or equal. The way that he plays these games is absolutely ludicrous. He plays so aggro early on, even into a lane like Lucianami, which can punish you. He just is so aware of where he needs to be at all times. His positioning is near perfect. His ability to kite out damage is it's just not comparable to anybody else in the league. He's just that much better than everybody else he is playing against. He's absolutely going to deserve player of the game here. A lot of attention was actually given mid lane for a lot of the early game here, and so Prince and Winsome, you know, while they were on the Caitlyn Lux and they were pushing forward and doing a really good job of capitalizing there, they weren't exactly the big focal points, but eventually all roads lead to Prince on FlyQuest, and you get to a point where you just want to team fight around him over and over again. And that's kind of what happened here, is FlyQuest kind of won every single lane early on, and then they just kind of played super aggro towards the back half. JoJo was able to pick up some kills off the back of Vikla, which we'll get in a bit. Vikla didn't exactly play this game perfectly, but Prince and Winsome, I thought, did a really good job on the Caitlyn Lux being able to kind of generate that own lead. Big shout out to Impact in the top lane on the Sion. You're seeing 0 deaths on Sion. Obviously, that's reportable. He didn't actually use his passive once the entire game, and that is absolutely tragic. Obviously, I'm kidding. He was able to shove in a Jace and take his tower in like 15 minutes, as Sion does, I guess. I don't know what happened here. I can't even begin to tell you. We'll get to Someday in a bit, but this laning phase was absolutely disastrous for Someday, and it went exactly the way that Impact wanted it to. This was essentially an isolated 1v1 for the entirety of the game that Impact just won. He got the shove in and was able to take the tower. I don't really know how that ended up happening. Even going back and rewatching it, it feels like Someday was just giving over so much that he absolutely had no right to give over, but credit to Impact. He continued to play well. He did a really good job early on in the laning phase, and then obviously Sion from ahead is incredibly dangerous in the mid game. Add that onto an Amumu who's just going to CC lock you into an Oblivion. Like, what is this Lucian supposed to do? What is this Victor supposed to do in the late game? If you get a Mumu hooked, if you get a Mumu queued, you're literally doomed. Caitlyn's going to be doing 1 billion damage. Lux is going to be keeping you stunned forever. Sion's going to be knocking you up. You still have an Aurelia there who does have gold. She's just kind of playing a little aggro, and so you just have a lot of tools here for FlyQuest to be able to win the game towards the back half, and they did a really good job executing on that. I gotta talk about Vikla, though. Ooh, yeah, he got first blood in this game on JoJo in the mid lane. Really, really great. You love to see that. And then they let him cook a little bit too much, I would say. He started taking some fights that weren't necessarily in his favor. Started giving a lot of gold back over to Evil Geniuses, making this game a lot more interesting. I saw someone say in Twitch chat, you can take Vikla out of KT, but you can't take KT out of Vikla. And I really do believe that that was what happened in this game. This is kind of what I was talking about with Vikla going into the year. There's a reason that I said that he wasn't Prince level of an import, right? Prince was an MVP caliber player in the LCK, whereas Vikla was just a really good player. Like, he was a solid LCK player, someone who was definitely starting on an LCK team, but not someone that I would consider to be like a superstar at a global level. I think Vikla is going to make some mistakes like this every once in a while. The inconsistency that he offered last year was definitely on display here. I still think, obviously, he's probably the best mid laner in North America. I'm not trying to argue that. I'm just trying to say that he's not Prince, where Prince just feels like he's like a gap above everybody else in the league. Vikla does show at least a little bit of cracks in the armor. I think he was taken advantage of a bit in this game. Luckily, it just didn't really matter. FlyQuest was so far ahead in basically every other aspect. They were just able to snowball the game out of control. As for Evil Geniuses, another frustrating game. It's not the worst loss in the world. You're going 3-2 here, but you're losing to FlyQuest. I feel like losing to FlyQuest is certainly not like the end of the world by any means. JoJo easily had his best game of the split, in my opinion. He did a really good job, even though he got first blooded early and didn't necessarily play the first like 5 minutes of the lane entirely well as the Victor, where you just need to be respectful here, and he just didn't respect Vikla's damage. Vikla obviously doing a good job to get that reset kill But after that, I thought JoJo actually did a really good job of being able to kind of come back and get his team back into the game. I think him on the Victor was the big reason why Evil Geniuses made this game relatively close in the mid game. Obviously, that ends up pulling away because Prince does a really good job of separating them in the second half of the mid game. But JoJo did, I think, a much better job than he had in the first couple of weeks of maintaining the course. I think early on in the season, JoJo, obviously, from ahead, would oftentimes play way too aggro and put his team and himself in bad positions. I think it was kind of the opposite here. I think his team was super far behind, and he did a good job trying to pull it back. My dud of the game is going to go to Someday in the top lane. Like I said, as Jace, you just can't be getting pushed in by Sion in the 1v1 and getting your tower taken and not really having any sort of pressure on the top side. It's really just unacceptable. Someday really hasn't been fantastic to start the year. He hasn't been bad. I don't want it to come across like he's been bad, but Someday's laning status has definitely taken a little bit of a dip. Losing lane to Impact was just not something that he would have done in 2022, and so obviously, getting him accustomed, getting him used to playing with the rest of the team, you're integrating a new player into an organization. I'm not going to expect him to just be able to flip that switch immediately. Hopefully, he'll be able to kind of get closer and more adjusted with the rest of this team as the season goes on, but so far, he's just kind of been a meh top laner, which is not really the Someday that I think a lot of people wanted to see. But overall, for Evil Geniuses, not the worst loss in the world. Like I said, losing to FlyQuest, there are certainly worse teams that you can lose to. Sitting at 3-2 is certainly not where you want it to be as a team that really, should be top 3. But with how the league is shaped up, losing 2 games isn't exactly the end of the world. It feels like there aren't really going to be a lot of teams that are going to be pushing for that 4-1 record, what with FlyQuest, and a lot of other teams that are really good, kind of just flying around everywhere. And so I'm not particularly surprised to see EG lose here, but hopefully they can get back on their winning ways later in the week. And then for FlyQuest, you just continue your fantastic run of form. This team genuinely looks unbeatable if Prince is playing like this. Impact is playing some of the best League that he has played in quite a while. This reminds me of 2021 Impact on Evil Geniuses when he was having that fantastic split early on. And then Spica's right back to form. Winsome actually looks pretty good in that support position. I still think that you should put Ayla back in. I've heard some conversation that with as well as Winsome is playing, he should stay in, but Ayla's just a different kind of talent. I think he at least deserves a spot to show that he can be what Winsome is right now for the best ADC in the league. And then, for all of Vicla's flaws, he still has been a very big positive push forward for this team. It was just kind of a rough game for him against Evil Geniuses here. So overall, FlyQuest still looking like easily the best team in the league and genuinely could be an actual threat on an international level. Moving on to our third game here of day number 1. We had an interesting matchup between Team Liquid and 100 Thieves, and a little bit of revenge coming out from a couple of the 100 Thieves players as we saw them pick up a pretty clean victory here, and they looked fantastic doing so. This 100 Thieves team has really exceeded my expectations in their ability to take down a lot of these mid-tier teams in the league. It very much feels like a very defined top 4 in the league right now, and 100 Thieves are absolutely a part of that. And a lot of that is off the back of me getting this bot lane wrong. I talked about this in my preseason predictions, my preseason power rankings, that I was a little bit concerned about 100 Thieves investing a lot into their bot lane. I knew that this bot lane was going to be the high resource side. I talked about that a lot in that video in particular. I was a little bit worried about what was going to happen with Tenacity not getting a lot of resources, with Closer not necessarily being a resource machine like he has been in the past, because Doublelift, historically on every team that he's played on, has been the primary resource threat, and that has absolutely been true here on 100 Thieves. What I got wrong in that video was that was going to be a problem at all, that Doublelift getting all the resources was going to be an issue for 100 Thieves, because it has clearly not been. Doublelift has been fantastic. He gets another player of the game here. He was my player of the week last year in the LCS. He genuinely has been fantastic. One of the best players in the entire league, without question. I think him and Busio are working relatively well. Busio can get a little bit over-aggressive at times, which we saw not only in this game, but basically every game that he has played. He plays with no fear, and that can be good sometimes. That can be bad sometimes. We'll see that later on in the week as well. But Doublelift, just in general, he has just been fantastic. The amount of damage that he's been able to put out while staying completely safe. A lot of people see him as obviously like a Zeri one-trick, or at least that's kind of how he's been since he's come back. Zeri's banned out this game. He gets to play the Caitlyn, and he does absolutely fantastic on it. What he really is showing at this point is that he is just one of the best players in the league still. I was very, very concerned with him coming back. It felt like he hadn't played League super competitively in a while. Even when he was streaming a lot of other games, and yes, he was watching and still playing the game at a relatively good level, but it's different when you're a pro player, right? Like, you're playing against people who are playing 12 hours a day, every day, and that's just not what he was doing. But clearly it did not take him long to get right back into the swing of things, because he has been fantastic to start the season. If he can keep this up, 100 Thieves is absolutely going to be a title contender, and that top 4 is very real. Credit to Bjergsen as well here in the mid lane. His Weaver's wall on Talia multiple times throughout this game were fantastic. I mean, his ultimates on this champion are just second to none. I think a lot of people forget that Talia used to be one of Bjergsen's comfort champions back in the day. I'm talking like 2015, 2016, right around when that champion came out, about a year or so after the release. We looked at Bjergsen having a couple of really good pocket picks. Obviously, the Zillion's always been there, but Talia was right there with all of them as being a major comfort pick for Bjergsen, and that certainly has carried over. I complained a lot about him not playing it enough last year, and him pulling it out here was really, really good. He absolutely dominated Harry in the macro game in terms of being able to get out on the map and make a lot of plays. This is kind of the 2022 meta that we saw, where we saw a carry, mid laner pick something like an Azir and want to try to farm up and be a little bit more lane oriented, and then we saw someone just counter with a Sylas or an Ahri or Talia or something that is just going to leave lane and go do something else, and that's what Bjergsen did in this game. Got bot lane super far ahead. Closer did a fantastic job of being able to set the pace of the game. Pioshik's scoreline looks fine, but he never had any control of this game. And then credit to Tenacity. He actually went down early on in the laning phase and then solo killed Summit. So, a couple of really, really good showings, I would say, from everybody on 100 Thieves, but most notably Doublelift and Bjergsen, who just continue to prove that the old guard is certainly not washed up quite yet. As for Team Liquid, another frustrating loss here. This is a team that really is not starting out the way that they want to. They're now sitting below 500 at 2-3, and I get it, their schedule's been relatively difficult, but they've also lost some games that they absolutely had no right to lose. I mean, losing to TSM isn't looking particularly great right now, and I think a lot of it is off the back of just the inconsistency that this team has. I really do think that this team has shown to have one win condition over the course of the season so far, and that is, unironically, Yeon in the bottom lane. When Yeon wins, this team wins. When Yeon loses, this team loses. It really feels like there is so much on his shoulders as a player. Him and Core have to win their 2v2 in the bottom lane, and going up against someone like Doublelift, who is quite frankly just better than Yeon is right now, even though I don't think it's by like a ridiculous margin. I do think he's a little bit better. I think just shows you how little TL has to be able to win these games. Their top side is miserably bad. Summit actually got out to like a 10-20 CS lead here on the Renekton, and then got solo killed by the Jax, and then went and tried to dive a Varus and got completely blown up and died immediately. Like, Summit was so ridiculously useless this game. Again, he's constantly in bad positions, making bad decisions, diving in situations where he shouldn't be. He's my dud of the game. Again, he's been this team's worst player by a considerable margin, and that's a problem, because you really need this top side to get better. If Yeon is kind of carrying this team, that's okay, but that's not going to make you a top team. Yeon is good. He's not great. He's not going to be able to keep up with Prince. He's not going to be able to keep up with Berserker. He's not going to be able to keep up with Doublelift. He's not the kind of player who is on that level in terms of what he's able to do right now. He might be able to get there by the end of the year, but you're going to need players like Summit and players like Pioshik to step up. Pioshik's stat line looks pretty good, but that's because he accomplished basically nothing this game. He played super passive on the Maokai, got completely out-jungled by Closer in terms of map pressure and in terms of objective control, and so he just kind of had to sit back and let the game kind of happen around him, and so his score lane ends up looking fine. Harry picks a carry-oriented mage into Bjergsen, who just leaves lane all the time, and he's not nearly as useful as him in the team fights. Team Liquid was just kind of doomed. It's not to say Yeon played well. Like, I've been talking Yeon up, but he didn't play particularly well in this game, got outplayed by Doublelift. Team Liquid just doesn't really have a lot of win conditions when their bot lane is not winning, and that's concerning. There are a lot of teams in the LCS that I would consider that to be the case for right now. I would say a majority of teams rely on their bot lane in the LCS right now, and that is just, it's a recipe for disaster, because when you don't win, you can't win, and that's kind of where Team Liquid is at. As long as that is the case for this team, they are not going to be a team that seriously competes to be in like the upper echelon. The top four, again, feel very, very locked for me right now, and TL is proving that by being absolutely destroyed by 100 Thieves in this game. But for 100 T, you gotta feel really good. They're able to pick up another win here. All their young players are playing well. Tenacity looks awesome in the top lane. Bjergsen and Doublelift don't look washed at all. Closer has been incredibly efficient at being able to enable the rest of the team. 100 Thieves honestly just looks like they're clicking. I'm not exactly sure where the difference is between them and like Evil Geniuses and them and Cloud9. I think 2 to 4 are all relatively close. Obviously, FlyQuest at number 1, but 2 to 4 are all relatively close, and it's good to see a team like 100 Thieves be able to keep pace with a lot of these other rosters that some people, me included, thought were just going to outpace them this year. Moving on to game number 4 now of day 1, we had two teams that are kind of a little bit on the free fall, both definitely hoping to stop it here, as we saw Counter Logic Gaming taking on Golden Guardians. And Golden Guardians pick up their first win of the year here. They went 0-4 in their first 2 weeks, but they finally are able to pick up win number 1 over a very much struggling CLG team. This is a team that started off 2-0 this year, went undefeated in week 1, and then of course everything started to crash down. They were really bad last week, and they were really, really bad in this game. I mean, this game was as disastrous as CLG has looked in quite a while, but good for Golden Guardians. This is how you get your first win of the season. You look incredibly solid doing it. It feels like the team is getting used to playing with each other, I would say, with Gory in now. I think it's clear that the offseason absolutely helped River as well get a little bit more accustomed to playing with some of the team members. Huhi coming in, I do think, has helped the cohesion quite a bit. He's obviously played with Stixxay before, but it feels like him and Stixxay have a very good bot lane duo, partnership. It just feels like Golden Guardians is kind of starting to click maybe a tad bit more in this game, at least, than they had at any point before this. Obviously, CLG struggling definitely helps with that, but it is worth noting that that is a good sign to see. My player of the game, it was definitely up to a couple of people here, but I am going to give it to Huhi in the support position. I've seen a lot of people be very critical of Huhi, both on Reddit and in my comments section. I'm somewhere in the middle of this debate. I think Huhi is better than a lot of people are giving him credit for. I do think he had a down year last year. I'm not going to try and sit here and say that Huhi is a top, 2 support in the region like he has been at points in the past, especially in this meta, which is definitely not favored towards Huhi's playstyle of being a more engage-oriented support rather than enchanters, but I still think he's a lot better than Reddit and my comment section a lot of times gives him credit for. He is still a support that can make an impact at this level. I would say he's right around the same level as a player like Sven or a player like Chime. I think those are really solid supports that can be really impactful at this level. But not ones that are necessarily going to, they're not core JJ, they're not Vulcan, supports that are actively going to change the game, right? Huhi is still very good, though, and he can have very big pop-off moments like he did in this game on the Karma. Ezreal Karma, a ridiculously aggressive way to try and counter the Caitlyn Lux. I actually like it in principle. I talked about this a bit earlier on in the season. I believe it was in the LCK, or it might have been the LPL. It was one of the two, but Ezreal Karma as a counter to Caitlyn Lux is certainly interesting because you're just kind of hoping on the idea that you're going to be able to poke them out from being able to do anything that they actually want to do. The Karma really has to outplay the Lux. That's kind of how the lane has to go. And luckily for Golden Guardians, that is exactly what happened here. Huhi was leaps and bounds better than Poom in the laning phase. Poom very much trying to target this Ezreal, really trying to trying to punish him, but honestly just forgetting the fact that Huhi was there. They were able to push forward and make that lane a lot more difficult to deal with in the 2v2. And then once Huhi felt like he gave Stixxay a solid enough lead, he's on the Ezreal, he can play safe. Huhi started playing Roam Karma, which I actually really like as an idea. He was going mid, really trying to enable this Taliyah, which is insane to say that you're taking a Karma out of bot lane in order to try and enable a Taliyah in the mid lane. That feels backwards, but it unlocked so many global plays that this Golden Guardians team wanted to do. It got Gory super far ahead, and I think Golden Guardians actually did a really good job capitalizing. So for me, Hui's going to get player of the game here. Stixxay also looking really good. It's actually quite funny. I talked about this a bit last year when we did our playoff review, but as much as I do think Luker and Poom are the better bot lane to Stixxay and Huhi and Stixxay and pretty much anybody, it is insane how Stixxay just seems to be Luger's kryptonite. I think Luger is the better player, but Luger has such a problem beating Stixxay in lane early on in games. Every single time that they play, it's actually quite astounding. That absolutely kept up here. Stixxay played really well. I think he capitalized on Huhi's great laning phase incredibly strongly. Obviously ended up playing weak side for a lot of the mid game, but Ezreal still does a ridiculous amount of damage towards the back half. Gory was accelerated so much towards the mid game that it really got to the point where it didn't really matter that Stixxay wasn't super far ahead anymore. He did a good job in the early game to make sure that Caitlyn Lux was not going to be a problem and then allowed the rest of his team to be really solid. That's the mark of a good AD carry. He did exactly what he needed to do, and then another really good game from Gory, this team's best player in my opinion. I don't think that's really a controversial opinion. In fact, I feel like it is maybe the most popular opinion you could give with Golden Guardians right now. He just continues to look really, really solid. I think him and River have good chemistry together. It's made River look a lot better, I think, as a jungler. He didn't look particularly good with Young, but more so than that, he looked really bad in summer of last year, and I think bringing Gory in, adding some stability to this team, really, really solid. Gory with the 2v1 in the mid lane was awesome to watch, really, really fun. And then River was fine, Licorice was fine. I think Golden Guardians overall definitely benefited more from their bot lane in this one than they typically do, and that's a sign that I think is really good for Golden Guardians. We know Gory can be a good player, but I talked about this before. As good as Gory has been, the rest of the team really has not been up to snuff, and that's why I had them at number 10, is it is difficult to win even if you have a good player on your team. If you have a lot of bad players in the rest of the positions, if the bot lane is going to step up and actually be able to play competitively at a reasonably mid-tier level in the LCS, then this team is going to be able to win quite a few games, and they absolutely did that in this one. For CLG, on the other hand, now you're getting a little bit scared. You're getting a little bit worried. Bot lane lost. It happens, like I said, 6A is Luger's kryptonite, but Poom was really bad. He was constantly trying to target this Ezreal on the Lux, completely ignoring the karma and getting punished over and over and over again. This is one of the worst laning phases that I've seen out of Poom in a very long time. Typically, that's his strong suit. I've always talked about this. Poom is really good in the 2v2 in lane. Where he really struggles is the mid game and translating that pressure into actual map, pressure, I would say, lane pressure into map pressure, right? He's someone who will constantly be caught, putting wards up in the river or overextending without his team's, support or without vision, and that's kind of always been Poom's problem. It's just being a little bit too aggro when he does have a lead. He's usually really good in the lane 2v2. That was not the case here. He was really bad in the lane 2v2. He is an easy choice for dud of the game, in my opinion. Although, I say easy, you could give it to quite a few people. Again, Luger didn't particularly play well. I thought Poom played significantly worse, though, so felt pretty easy to give it to him. I think you could very realistically give this to Palafox in the mid lane, who just looked like he looked awful on the Azir. Quite frankly, there really isn't anything else I can say. When you're getting completely 1v1'd by a Talia in the mid lane, hell, even 1v2'd with a Graves in the mid lane by a Talia, that's how you know you're just not playing Azir well. The mechanics were not there. The damage output was not there. It just felt like he hadn't had a ton of practice on this champion, which is not the case. Palafox is very good at Azir, so it was just one of those games. But between Poom and Palafox, this game felt pretty unwinnable for CLG. Contracts got super behind in the jungle matchup. Doglo was a complete non-factor in the top lane. Everything right now is going wrong for CLG. There really is not one person that you can point to and say, this is the problem. I think last week it very much felt like Contracts was just overextending, kind of reverting back to his Golden Guardians days of just being in the wrong spot and playing way too aggro and costing his team for it. But this week, this game was not Contracts' fault. He didn't necessarily play well, but this one wasn't his fault at all. The bot lane lost really hard. The mid lane lost really hard. Top lane was never going to be in your favor with Renekton versus Cassante early, and so at that point, the game is just over. You have no pressure on the map. You're not really able to do anything, especially on a late game, more power farming jungler like Graves. Yes, he can make some impact early, but you draft Graves in order to hurt late game. You don't draft Graves in order to be able to compete with Vi in the first 5 minutes of the game. And so when all of your lanes are losing, it feels pretty disastrous. Overall for CLG, I'm starting to get concerned. This team really does not look like they are able to compete with a lot of the teams at this level. Getting absolutely obliterated by a winless Golden Guardians is not exactly how I think they wanted to kick off their week after what was a disastrous week 2. Obviously, they have one more game this week, but they are going to absolutely need to win that in order to not feel really pressured to really step things into gear as quickly as possible. And then for Golden Guardians, this is a really good way to get your first win of the season. It was absolutely a demolition. They were the better team by a long shot. Your bot lane looked good. Your mid lane looked good. Your jungle looked good. I still think top lane is a weakness for you, but this is a team that is probably better than number 10. I was probably not giving them enough credit by putting them at number 10. I didn't think the bot lane was going to be able to step up. That's where I was wrong, and I am pretty happy to be proven wrong in that instance. Moving on to our 5th game here, and our final one of day number 1. We had a match between two sort of bottom teams here as we saw Immortals taking on Dignitas. And Immortals picks up another win here. Dig moves to 0-5. I mean, completely and utterly helpless Dignitas looks like right now. They actually had a shot in this game, but yet another barren fight that does not go the way of Dignitas. Name a better duo in League of Legends history. I just don't think that you possibly can. Let's talk about Immortals, though, because I do think they looked relatively good in this game, and I actually think they've looked relatively good over the past week or so. Maybe not great. Obviously, I don't think a lot of teams in the league right now are looking great. The top 4 definitely have separated themselves, but Immortals, honestly, not that far off from being, right up there with some of the other teams that we're seeing kind of struggle in that vein. My player of the game is going to go to Tactical in the bot lane. When this team wins, he actually looks really good. The problem is that the consistency is just not there at all for the bot lane. Tactical is just not the kind of player that is going to be able to win every game, but it does seem that when he loses, it still is a major problem. Luckily for Immortals, they had got to go against what is easily the worst bot lane in North America right now, and Tactical was able to kind of farm them a bit. Tactical actually looked really, really solid here on the Zeri with the Lulu. Going into that Lucian Nami, I always talk about how Lucian Nami should just have pressure early on in that lane. There really should be nothing that the Zeri Lulu or Zeri Yumi, they shouldn't be able to match really at all, as long as the Lucian Nami plays relatively okay in that lane. Unfortunately, Tactical and Fleshy were just better in the laning phase, so they were able to generate a really nice solid lead on the side of Immortals. And then once you get Zeri kind of snowballing out of control, I also talk about this. If Zeri does end up winning that 2v2 in the bot lane, it's over. The game is completely over because no one can stop Zeri if she accelerates early. That's the whole point of the champion, is that once she accelerates, she is gone. I mean, pun intended, with the speed that she's able to generate, right? If she's able to accelerate her gold gain in the game, she's just going to be stronger and able to kill people more efficiently than anyone else in the game, and that's kind of what happened here. So credit to Tactical, really good game from him. Credit to Fleshy, who I think really helped in the 2v2 lane as well. We'll talk about Spawn and Biofrost, who are just not good right now, but those two definitely, I think did a lot of really good work here. And then I also want to give a big shout out to Kenvi in the jungle. Kenvi, I really do think has had a solid season, in my opinion. Has pretty easily been the best player on this Immortals team so far in 2023, and that is exactly what you wanted to see if you were an Immortals fan or if you were just an NA talent fan. Kenvi was somebody who was so hyped up for so long in the NA ecosystem on 100X, then on 100 Academy. And, now getting his shot on Immortals, he got it last year, but he just wasn't able to perform. He was not particularly good playing with the rest of his team. Him and Power Evil seem to have negative chemistry in that mid-jungle duo. You insert Kenvi into here, you could say what you want about a Blaze Olive, you could say what you want about Revenge, but I would argue that Kenvi has significantly better synergy with these players than he did with anybody on the team last year, which is just a good sign overall. It's just comforting, I think reassuring to see a player like Kenvi actually be able to play at a relatively high level in the LCS, what with his pedigree and how much we were all cheering for him to be good when he got into the LCS last year. So Kenvi looking good. Tactical and Fleshy, when this team wins, looks good as well. I think Revenge has also had some really solid games up on the top side. Revenge and Kenvi have definitely been the two members of this team that I would say have been the most efficient. Blaze Olive certainly has his moments where he looks good, but also has his moments where he doesn't look nearly as good. And then Tactical and Fleshy always talked about that. They're going to be able to beat up on bot lanes that are worse than them. They're going to get absolutely destroyed by bot lanes that are better than them. That just seems to be where this Immortals team lands. I'm not sure they're ever going to be a team that could ever compete for playoffs because of that, volatility that this team offers just inherently with a lot of their players, but this is the kind of win that you really wanted to see in order for me to believe that this team isn't actually a bottom two team. Like, they're certainly not playing like one right now, which is a really good sign to say. As for Dignitas, not so good. I mean, pretty much everything that could have gone wrong for this team has gone wrong for this team. I have to say it, I do try to be completely honest on this channel. I stick to my guns, but also I try to admit when I'm wrong. Spawn is just not good enough to play at this level. I was wrong about Spawn. He was someone who I was very high on last year and going into this year. I thought he was sneakily one of the best players in Academy in 2022. Got his shot at the LCS level. That entire team was a disaster last year, so I was like, give him more time, and I was very excited and very happy that Dignitas gave him the starting spot to start the year. I thought putting a lot of, proven talent around him, players like Santora and Jensen, Biofrost, was going to be very positive for Spawn's development, that he was going to be able to pay that out by being that late game carry, being fine in lane. That's really where he shined last year, was scaling into that late game and being solid in that part of the game and really not being a problem in the early game, which is always kind of a positive, just a very good late game hyper carry you can put alongside of other really talented early game players and get a really solid ADC out of it. That's just not what Spawn has been. He's been a huge liability in lane, in particular in the 2v2. His laning 2v2 has just been horrendous all year long. There really is no other way to put it. Hopefully it can get better. I mean, at this point, you're really going to start to think about Tomo and Diamond down in NACL because they've actually been really solid for Dignitas Academy. A little bit up and down for my taste, and I certainly don't think that they are going to be some superstar bot lane in North America, but Spawn and Biofrost are actively holding this team back, in my opinion. Spawn's going to get out of the game again here. It feels like he's gotten it in almost all 5 of Dignitas' games. He is yet to have a game in the LCS where he has actually looked okay, and that is a problem. He's certainly not the only person on this team that is playing bad, but he is probably the player on this team that is playing worst. And then obviously Biofrost is eventually probably going to come out for Ignar. I don't know when that's going to happen, but that's still on the table as far as I'm aware. And then Santorin and Jensen. I mean, you could talk about Jensen kind of being the one to keep Dignitas in some of these games, and I definitely think that was the case here in this one, where it was relatively close for a bit. Dignitas had an opportunity to be able to win this off the back of Jensen's Azir and Armad's Jace, who I think both played kind of okay in this game, but Santorin has honestly been really bad for Dignitas as well. It's not just been the bot lane. If it was just the bot lane and your top side was winning, I think this team absolutely could still win games, but that's not the case. Everybody on this team is underperforming. Jensen's had moments, but really hasn't been like this carry-oriented threat that this team really needs him to be. Santorin's just been bad. Armad has been bad for most of the games. He was good in this one, but Dignitas is just kind of crumbling, I would say, around all of them. Like, really, none of the players are playing up to their level, and I don't really expect any of that to change. It doesn't feel like there is a lot of playstyle synergy between a lot of the players on this roster and in this organization, and so for now, I mean, you're looking at Dignitas outlook-wise as the worst team in the LCS. They're 0-5 for a reason. With Golden Guardians picking up a win, they are now the only winless team in the region, and they absolutely deserve it. They have yet to play a game where it really feels like they are the better team, and they deserve to win, and that's going to mean that you're going to start the season 0-5. Hopefully, you can pick up a win later in the week to not go 0-6, but even if you do, like, how long until you start making changes? How long until you say, okay, this split is probably just over? Like, spring split is not it for us. Hopefully we can rebound in summer, because that's really where it's starting to feel like you're going to need to go on the side of Dignitas. Out for Immortals. Outlook for Immortals, I should say. Another good win. You're sitting at 2-3, which is so much better than I and a lot of other people expected you to be at this point in the year. I thought Immortals was clearly going to be the worst team in the LCS. They have not been that. There are other teams that are struggling more, and I would say that has more to say about other teams than it does about Immortals, but Revenge and Kenvi in particular on the top side I think have been really solid, and when Tactical wins, he actually wins. Like, that is something you can say about Tactical. When he gets a lead, he knows what to do with it. The problem is that he will take these crazy risks and position in very aggressive spots, and oftentimes that won't be able to generate him leads against some of the better AD carries and the better teams in the league. And so, but when Immortals wins, like, they're going to win and they're going to look decent doing it. This looks like a team that, quite frankly, isn't bottom two, and I think that in and of itself is a pretty nice accomplishment for this Immortals team. That's going to bring us to day number 2 here in week number 3 of LCS action, and we kicked off day 2 with maybe the game of the week, the one that most people were looking forward to. We had FlyQuest taking on 100 Thieves. And FlyQuest continues their winning ways by picking up another big victory, remaining undefeated, and proving that they truly are the #1 team in the region. They have now defeated all of the other top 3 teams. They are basically the only losses that those other teams have suffered on this season, and FlyQuest just looks genuinely unstoppable. I really do think the impressive part for me, and the thing that scares me, is the fact that it is not just one player. Like, as good as Prince has been, and as important, I would say, as Prince has been for FlyQuest's success and how much they build around him and, you know, what they do in the late game to try and get him ahead and his team fighting prowess and everything, right? It's not just him. Like, Vikla's had some fantastic games. Spica was terrific in this game. Impact has been really solid in the top lane. Maybe not in lane in this game, but he was useful outside of lane. And then Winsome has actually filled into that support position at a really high level. It's certainly been an upper mid-tier LCS support for his time in the LCS so far. So it's not a one-man team. This isn't FlyQuest just getting Prince and having the best player in the league and then all of a sudden winning a lot of games. This is really, really smart roster construction, and honestly, all 5 members of the team coming together and looking like the best version of this team that you could possibly put out. I think a lot of people, again, are just going to give player of the game to Prince because, yeah, he popped off, especially in these late game team fights, but I think we would be discrediting a player on this team to just AFK give him player of the game, because to me, Spica absolutely deserves player of the game here on the Sejuani. Not only did he make some really good plays, able to catch Bjergsen in that mid lane gank, really able to control the map, but he was just so far ahead of everyone else in terms of the macro plays that FlyQuest needed to make in this game that it was a really easy choice for me to give player of the game to Spica. I think Spica and Prince both were phenomenal, but Spica, I think, definitely deserves the player of the game on the Sejuani. He just sets the rest of his team up so efficiently, so often. We've been seeing it on the Amumu that he's been able to pull out over the past couple of games. We saw it in this one on the Sejuani. He jungled circles around Closer, who has been really good to start the year. Certainly someone that I think a lot of people are high on. Spica was just so much better than him in this game that it was honestly kind of astounding, and that was the biggest, difference in my opinion between FlyQuest and 100 Thieves. And we'll get into some of the other problems that 100 Thieves had, because it wasn't perfect, I would say, for FlyQuest. They certainly had some moments in the game where it looked like it could be a little bit shaky. Tenacity, in particular, had a phenomenal game up on top side, and Impact definitely kind of gave that to him. Not a particularly good laning phase from Impact, but that's kind of what we've been used to getting from him, I would say, over the past year, is a bad laning phase and then some really good team fighting. This was the Impact that was playing on Evil Geniuses last year. Luckily, they were able to rebound. He didn't lose hard enough to the point where it became unwinnable for FlyQuest or anything like that. Spica did a really good job setting up the mid game to be able to kind of explode and to have a lot of these engage-oriented fights. You're looking at a Xayah Rakan, you're looking at Talia, you're looking at Maokai. They have a lot of peel. They have especially a lot of peel for this Xayah, but if you can land a lot of your damage, if you can land a lot of your CC, it is very difficult for 100 Thieves to actually win these fights, and Spica knew that, and so he was very willing to go in, try and take these, play super aggressive, play for fights, and it absolutely worked out for FlyQuest. Also, credit to Prince. I don't feel like I have to go into this, but he is just the best player in the LCS, and it's not particularly close. He is so much more talented than anybody else in the league that it's almost astounding, and honestly, it's very, very fun to watch. I hope he just continues to be able to keep this up. We've seen players be really dominant at the beginning of their LCS careers and then slowly fall off over time. Hopefully, Prince is not going to be doing that, because that would be very disappointing. I have faith that he's going to be able to keep this level up. He seems like a grinder. He seems like someone who is just committed to getting better and better every single year, and hopefully that will continue to be the case for FlyQuest, because he's already so good right now. Like I already said, I think Winsome actually played this game incredibly well in that same vein. Those are the three players that I really want to shout out. Spica, obviously, Prince, obviously, and then Winsome I don't think is going to get nearly enough credit for how well he played the Nautilus here. I know we can talk about how playing Xayah Rakan into Kai'Sa Nautilus isn't particularly good, like on the side of 100 Thieves. Just blind picking Xayah Rakan super early on in the draft was very troll, but Prince and Winsome, I think, definitely played out that lane well, and Winsome just outplayed Busio basically to every extent. So FlyQuest really looking good, looking like the best team without a lot of doubt. As for 100 Thieves, a little bit of a disappointing performance. You are going up against the best team in the league, but you had a lot of hype going into this game. I think a lot of people really wanted to see you kind of hold your own. Unfortunately, you weren't able to do that. Credit to Tenacity in the top lane. He was phenomenal on this Fiora, able to solo kill Impact, able to really try and snowball the game. Really, he was the one who kept this game alive, I would say, for 100 Thieves. Without him, I think this game would have been an entire stomp. Like, it would have been completely and utterly doomed on the side of 100T. But luckily, they had Tenacity. I thought Bjergsen made some good plays, but he also made some really bad plays. Not flashing the Sejuani ultimate in the mid lane definitely comes to mind, but really, when you're looking at players that got outplayed, the two that come to mind are Closer and Busio in this game, who just were not on the same level as their counterparts on FlyQuest. Closer just got completely out-jungled, completely out-macroed in this game by Spica, and it wasn't particularly close. And then Busio was just bad. This is one of the worst mechanical performances that I've seen out of a support in quite a long time. Not only did he actively lose laning phase by getting caught by the Nautilus and just getting blown up, giving Prince a lot of gold already earlier on in the game in order to make it a lot easier for him to snowball, but his engages in the late game were useless. And I get it, you're Rakan playing into Nautilus, but you blind picked Rakan. Like, they're going to pick Nautilus. I don't know why you would have assumed that they would have done something other than that, right? Like, there were so many things that could have stopped this bot lane, and they picked one of them, and then you couldn't play the game. So yeah, Busio is my dud of the game. He honestly has been, I don't want to say a little bit disappointing, but I think I was expecting him to come in and be this big firecracker of energy, him and Doublelift to really work together well. I think when 100 Thieves wins in the bot lane, they look really good, but I think when they lose in the bot lane, Busio looks like he is completely and utterly boosted, and that's kind of just been the general theme. Hopefully he can get a tad bit more consistent, because you know, when they are working and when things do work out well in the bot lane, I think Doublelift and Busio look really solid together. It's just not been consistent really at all. And then Closer's really got to step it up. I'm lower on Closer. I've notoriously been lower on Closer than other, analysts out there. I still think he's a really good jungler, but clearly I think Spica is just kind of playing at a different level right now, and I think Spica is definitely in that conversation for top jungler in the league that Closer I just don't think is in right now. He just needs to step up, maybe be a little bit more consistent. We saw him be a little bit more aggro in this game than maybe he should have been. That's always been a thing with Closer. He's going to try to push the envelope even when he can't. So outlook-wise for 100 Thieves, you're still sitting at 4-2. That's not a bad record by any means. You've only dropped games to potentially the two best teams in the entire league in FlyQuest and Cloud9, so you're not going to be freaking out. You're not going to be losing your mind over the fact that you lost this one. However, it would have been really, really cool and really, really nice, obviously, to pick up that win. Just got to bounce back, got to realize that FlyQuest is just maybe an opponent that you're maybe not on the same level as yet. You need to continue to keep building your synergy, continue to keep building your ability to win these games, and maybe, by the end of the season, you'll be able to get there. As for FlyQuest, I mean, they're the unbeatable gods of the LCS right now. You're ending week number 3, 6-0, and they really don't look like anybody is on their level. They have now played every single major top team in the region, and they have yet to lose a game, so I don't really know what else to say. FlyQuest is so much better than the competition, and honestly, I would expect them to continue their win streak for quite a long time, and hopefully this means that NA can finally prove itself on an international stage, because if this team can't do it, I'm really not sure which one will ever be able to. Now we move on to our second game of day number 2, and it is a classic matchup between the two longest running organizations here left in North America. We had TSM taking on CLG. And TSM picks up a massive victory here. CLG continues their complete and utter, landslide down the standings. They started 2-0. They're now sitting at 2-4, not having picked up a win in either of the last 2 weeks. But TSM moves back to 500 here. They really struggled last week, and they were struggling at the beginning of this week, but a little bit of a bounce back here. Maybe catching CLG at a bad time, taking advantage of what is a pretty awful draft on the side of CLG, which we will get into, but TSM did a really good job of executing on that draft. I'll talk about this now, actually, because it really does kind of inform my opinion for the whole game. I don't really know what we expected. I'm not really the draft guy. Again, I understand that draft is important and that it matters, and obviously I know drafts, but I think you can win with bad drafts. I think you can lose with good drafts. I don't think it's all the end-all be-all for a lot of these games, like a lot of analysts will make you think it is, but this one's really hard to win. It's on the side of CLG. TSM drafts Sion, and you send Jace mid, and you draft Renekton, and you've got Zeri, and now he can just stack armor, and the game's over. You can never kill him. The Sion is legit untouchable, and that's exactly how it played out. I mean, it is literally 1-for-1 how it played out. Solo was unkillable in this game, which is funny, because he's Sion. That's the whole point of the champion, is so you can die and not get flamed by your team, and you know what? Solo did a great job. He's player of the game, and it's not particularly close. He gets put on the Sion. He gets to stack his armor. Probably the funniest moment of the game that I want to give a shout out to is Sion does a really good job, or Solo does a really good job poking Dokla out of lane, taking a lot of these trades, making sure to hit his Qs. So Dokla has to back. He's walking back into lane. He walks immediately into a fully charged up Sion Q that is in vision and just dies. It's just one of those, I don't know what we were expecting kind of moments. Renekton's never going to be able to trade here. He instantly dies. It's just kind of a funny moment. Shout out to Solo. He obliterated Dokla in that 1v1 in the top lane, and then just became so strong that there was nobody else in the game that was ever going to be able to do anything to him. And so, credit to TSM. They knew their win condition was to make sure to get the Sion ahead. He's not the only one who played well in this game. I do want to give a shout out to Boogie on the Elise. This is clearly his best champion that is in the meta right now. The early game aggression that he shows on Elise is definitely inspiring. Definitely a good thing to see. I think with Boogie, I think some of the concerns that I've started to develop with him are that his mid games are just kind of bad. But I think it's okay. It ends up working out when you're able to get one of your lanes or multiple of your lanes really far ahead early on in the game, and then use them to be able to transition into that mid game a little bit easier. I just don't think Boogie understands how to control objectives in the same way that a lot of the other top junglers in the region do, in terms of slowing the pace down, making sure that your team is the only one that's able to gain resources. He's often looking for trades, even when from ahead, and that's just often not worth it when you're winning. And so a champion like Elise definitely plays into his strengths, I would say. Maple on the Sylas, you're playing Sylas and a Maokai, that's always a plus. Neo and Chime looked a lot better in the bot lane 2v2 here, although it was relatively unimpactful. The bot lane was just kind of there. Really, topside was the really impactful, kind of crazy-oriented side of the map, most specifically top lane, and Solo definitely earns player of the game for it. As for CLG, not a great loss here. Again, your draft is just abysmally bad. You shift Jason to the mid lane, draft Renekton in the top lane into the Sion, and you also pick Maokai into Sylas, and you've got Zeri Sona in the bottom lane, which is just never going to scale in the same way that Sivir Lulu is, and so I don't particularly understand any of the things on this draft. I think you were setting yourself up for failure, and I think you executed very well on that failure. A couple of options for dud of the game here. I think you realistically could give this to Contracts, and I really wouldn't be all that surprised. He was completely destroyed by Boogie in the early game, and then, like I said, once you have the Sylas on the other team, you're just simply never going to be able to get back into the game as the Maokai, because he is now just a better version of you. And then, you know, the actual dead of the game for me is going to go to Dokla in the top lane, who was just bad on this Renekton. I understand that it's really hard to play Renekton into full armor Scion, but at some point you have to realize that you're not going to be able to trade with him, and that you're going to need to lose lane gracefully. Him just walking up and dying a couple times is really not helping CLG, and for me, that earned him the dud of the game. Top lane really was the giant disparity between these two teams, and I think it was quite obvious. Dokla is a good player. I don't think he's necessarily the biggest problem on CLG right now in their big tumble down the standings, but I mean, you could say basically everybody on CLG is the cause of this tumble down the standings. I think Luger was their big proponent in week number 1 when they went 2-0. He looked fantastic, but he's kind of just been meh over the past few weeks. Poom has been really bad. I think Contracts has been really bad. I think Palafox has taken a huge step back. Dokla has taken a huge step back. CLG just doesn't look particularly good right now, and outlook-wise, I am concerned about this team. It's not that they're just losing to some of the top teams in the region. They actually were winning against the top teams. They beat, I guess Dignitas isn't a top team, right? But we thought they were going to be. And then they beat Evil Geniuses. Like, we were like, okay, well, maybe this team is actually legit. Now you're losing to bad teams. You're losing to Immortals. You're losing to TSM. You're losing to Golden Guardians. These are not the teams that you should be losing to. And so, yeah, I am a little bit concerned about CLG and the outlook of CLG as we move further along into the season. We're sitting at 2-4 now, and I have a feeling that it might only get worse as time goes on with how their mental is looking. For TSM, though, really nice win to get you back to 500. It's kind of a pretty decent spot for you to be in if you're TSM. I know 500 isn't exactly like a dominating record or anything, but we have to remember the expectations for this team were bottom 2, and they are certainly not bottom 2. They very well might be top 6 right now, which is just absurd with how the league has kind of shaked out. But, you know, top lane was dominant in this game. I think Boogie, when he gets the champions that he is good at, looks really good. And then I actually think Maple and Chime have been very efficient over the course of the year so far. If Neo can continue to just not be a problem, I would say, in the bot lane, TSM is actually a team I could see very much overperforming and potentially even making that top 6 playoffs here in spring. Moving on to our third game here of day number 2, and it's maybe the one I was most looking forward to seeing here in week number 3. We had Evil Geniuses taking on Cloud9, a battle kind of for second place here. And Evil Geniuses picks up a massive win over Cloud9. I really didn't expect this. I did not see this coming. I thought Cloud9 was probably the second best team in North America, but Evil Geniuses clearly making it known that they should not be counted out of that discussion. This is a team that obviously I was super high on going into the year. I had them at number 1 in my power rankings to start 2023, and obviously week number 1, you know, losing to CLG wasn't particularly inspiring, so they got knocked down a bit, but here they are now, sitting at 4-2, the same as Cloud9, the same as 100 Thieves, the same as all these other teams in second place, and, you know, pretty dominantly showing that they deserve to be considered the second best team in North America right now. They look really, really good, obviously, and I'm just hoping that they're able to keep it up. This certainly was a game. I'm not going to say it was a fun game, because it wasn't a particularly exciting and action-packed game. Both teams just kind of thinking they scale, and so both playing incredibly passive for a majority of this game, and that's going to happen, I would say, every once in a while. The problem is that C9 clearly did not scale nearly as well as Evil Geniuses. I do think both comps relatively do scale. You're looking at Lucian Nami on the side of Evil Geniuses that are going to get outscaled by Zeri Lulu, and then on the other side, you know, Tristan is probably going to outscale your Jace, and so you're hitting a point where you're just kind of hoping that your scaling threat can carry the game. Luckily for Evil Geniuses, JoJo was the best player in this game. He's going to get player of the game for Evil Geniuses, a very good sign. I've actually been very critical of JoJo's start to the 2023 season. I actually don't think he's been particularly great in their first couple of games, even in their wins. I don't think he has been like a standout threat, I would say, for Evil Geniuses. This was easily his best game of the year so far, channeling his inner Danny, pulling out the Tristana, and being able to carry in the late game team fights. He didn't really make any mistakes in the early game, which has just kind of been the problem with JoJo so far, is that especially in the early mid game, he's just often out of position, able to be taken advantage of. When he's on something like the Rise, he's in a side lane, he's able to be collapsed upon with no vision, and, you know, just kind of making a few mistakes here and there. He's still been relatively positive for the team, but just hasn't been able to weave out some of the mistakes. I think in this game, he didn't really make any mistakes. He was honestly just really good on the Tristana and very deserving of the player of the game. This is Summer JoJo. This is what we got more accustomed to seeing towards the back half of 2022. If he can keep this up for the rest of the year, Evil Geniuses is going to be a threat. Everybody else on EG looked pretty good as well. Someday was fine. Inspired was good on the Maokai. FBI and Vulcan did what they were supposed to do, which is win a little bit early here on the Lucian Nami into Zeri Lulu matchup. That's what you're supposed to do, and they executed on it. But really, this game was kind of just waiting and waiting and waiting, and eventually the Tristana was able to take over and win the game on the side of Evil Geniuses. As for Cloud9, definitely a little bit of a rough loss. This is kind of the opposite of what I wanted to see out of Cloud9. This was actually kind of indicative of their earlier series in the week against TSM as well, where I thought that they were just a little bit too slow until Blabber and Diplex just decided, like, oh, we're going to go win the game for the team. This one, they were just too slow, and they never decided we're going to go win the game. You had Berserker on Zeri, you had Fudge on Gwen, you had opportunities to be able to try and get back into this game. Fudge played a lot of these late game team fights incredibly well, even though they were a little bit boring, and you had a Gwen, like you had ways to win these team fights to set yourself up to be in a decent spot. You just weren't really able to execute on it. Evil Geniuses did a really good job of not only making sure that they controlled the tempo, but also, you know, starting Baron and sneaking Baron with 2 members and being able to use that to then push into the base and eventually end up winning the game off of that. It's a really good call from AG, but it's honestly just a lack of proactivity coming out from Cloud9, a lack of ability to understand that, you know, things are going to be happening in the game. They just played way too slow, they played way too passive, and they ended up paying the price for it. It's not really what I want to see out of a Cloud9 team that has really fun, aggressive players like Berserker, players like Blabber, players like Fudge, who we know are really good playing at this high tempo. I don't like to see this team slow it down. I really do not think that it plays to their strengths. My dud of the game is going to go to Blabber here in the jungle. I think you could realistically give this to a couple people, pretty much anybody on the team that's not Fudge. Fudge was really good for Cloud9 in this game, but everybody else kind of underperformed in my opinion. Berserker and Sven were never on the same level as FBI and Vulcan in terms of the damage output they were able to do in this game. Diplex just got outplayed by JoJo, especially towards the back half of this game, but Blabber kind of going in, missing Sejuani ult and dying. Not exactly the best look in the entire world, and so he's going to be getting my dud of the game. I just think this was more of a team gap than it was an individual player gap, in my opinion. Cloud9 definitely just looked worse as a team. They looked like they had less aggression. They looked like they had less intensity. They looked like they had less of an idea of how they wanted to win the game actively, and so, you know, Evil Geniuses just kind of took advantage of that. We're able to win it. Outlook-wise for Cloud9, not the worst loss in the world. I know I say that a lot on this channel, but Evil Geniuses is a good team. It's not like you're losing to Dignitas or Immortals or something like that. You're losing to Evil Geniuses. It's not the worst thing to lose, but the way you lost is just not particularly inspiring. It does give me a little bit of pause on Cloud9 being one of those teams that I think can compete at like the highest of high levels, but you know, obviously they have a lot of players on this team that we know can adapt that more aggressive mentality. I just don't think it showed up in this game. Hopefully you can rebound on that as we get into the Super Week next week in Week 4. For Evil Geniuses, though, really, really solid win. You were able to control the tempo. It's kind of against how you were playing the game all of last year. An incredibly slow win, which is just not how you became the #1 team in the regular season in North America last year, but it is a little bit, you know, I don't want to say inspiring, because that is a little bit of a pun here, but it's a good look for EG to show that they know how to slow the game down, know how to, you know, play these macro objectives, out macro their enemy team, and then just be able to close the game off of that, even if they're not, like, mechanically better than the enemy team, which I don't think they are. JoJo looked really good in the back half of this game. He was the one that was out-mechanicking a lot of the other players, but credit to Inspired, credit to Someday, credit to Vulcan, even credit to FBI. I think everybody pulled their weight for Evil Geniuses here, and this is the kind of win that does solidify you near the top of the standings. Moving on to our 4th game here of day number 2. We have a matchup that definitely went as expected. We had Dignitas taking on Team Liquid, and TL picks up another win here. They go 3-3. That's probably exactly where they wanted to be after a terrible start to the year. Obviously, an 0-2 start to the year. Bouncing back, being 500 by the end of Week 3 is at least a good sign. You are able to beat a lot of the teams that are below you in the standings. However, still a lot of question marks about this team potentially being a top team. But at the end of the day, nothing sets you right and back on the winning train faster than a game against Dignitas right now. And that's what Team Liquid was lucky enough to be graced with here at the end of Week 3. A pretty good win, I would say, for them overall. Definitely did it in relatively clean fashion. They were, they made a few mistakes in this game, which obviously we'll get to, but for the most part, Team Liquid was significantly better. My player of the game, I feel like it's a little bit up in the air for Team Liquid. Nobody really stood out as like the definite player of the game for me, but I'm actually going to give it to Core JJ in the support position here on the Karma. I thought he had a really good game. I think he's been a little bit underrated this year. I tweeted this out while this game was going on. Jan actually played really well on the Ezreal, and I said, man, unironically, without Jan, Team Liquid would be a complete disaster, and I actually do believe that to be a little bit true. I think it kind of spreads a little bit more to the bot lane in general. Without Jan and Core JJ here, I actually think this team is completely and utterly doomed. Like, I don't think that they've really shown a lot on the top side. I think Harry has had moments where he's looked really good, but I think for the most part, this game, Harry kind of bounced off the better players a little bit successfully. But I think it's finally time to start coming out and being like, yeah, Jan and Core are one of the best bot lanes in North America. Like, they just are playing like that right now. Credit to the Ezreal Karma. It's quite difficult to play into Caitlyn Lux. Just in general, I think Ezreal Karma does it incredibly solidly. You can play really safe in the early game, not really allow Caitlyn to be able to generate that lead, and then you're going to scale, as Ezreal and Karma has a lot of options for how she wants to play the game. She can play the 2v2, she can play the roam, she can really do whatever she wants. That's kind of the fun of Karma overall. But Jan and Core JJ were definitely better in this series. They were probably the lane that outplayed the other lanes the most, was this bot lane, which isn't particularly surprising when it comes to Dignitas, but we'll get into that in a second. I have some thoughts that I just want to talk about really quick, but for Jan and Core JJ, just continue to be good, please, because this is all that TL has in order to win games. Harry was good in this one, and I thought Pioshik didn't really make any major mistakes, but for the most part, it's Jan and Core JJ that are going to be pushing the tempo forward and really allowing Team Liquid to generate a lot of these leads. I do want to talk about Summit for a second. He played well for most of the game, but I'd be remiss to not talk about the one play that Summit made here. He actually survives a 2v1 dive top lane with the Jax and the Sejuani. Really, really well played from him to survive that. He basically had to play it perfectly, and he did on the Cassante in order to survive. And then immediately he goes right back in on the 70% health Jax and just dies for no reason. Like, that Summit in a nutshell plays incredibly well in order to survive a gank top lane, and then just runs it down for literally no explainable reason, and now Jax is super far ahead. There really is no other way to explain it other than that is Summit. That's just what he does. That's how he's going to play the game. I think he's been a little bit of a net negative for Team Liquid so far this year. Hopefully he can turn that around. He is mechanically still one of the best players, not just top laners, in the entire LCS, but golly, his brain is just, it's too massive. It's too massive for his own good. That's what I'll say. But good for Jan and Core JJ, and I thought Harry had one of his better games of the split. As for Dignitas, 0-6. I mean, you're 0-6. This season is, the split is basically over. And I'm just going to spend a lot of the Dignitas section kind of talking about public sentiment around this team. Go look at the Reddit threads, go look at Twitter. You're going to see a lot of Spawn slander, and I think it's deserved. I don't think Spawn is playing particularly good at all. I think that he's my dud of the game here. As you can see, he played really bad on the Caitlyn in lane. He was actively doing 0 damage. He was failing to use his summoners before getting blown up by an Ezreal and a Maokai, and so yeah, like, he deserves dud of the game, absolutely. He's not been playing well. He's been the worst ADC in the LCS, I should say. But it is worth noting that I've seen so many comments. I mean, so many comments that are like, if you take Spawn out of this team, Dignitas goes back to being top 6. And I think that is a gross misunderstanding of what is happening on Dignitas. For as bad as Spawn has been, you cannot be one player and make Dignitas look as bad as they have looked. Santorin, I've seen a lot of talk about, oh, just put, like, Wild Turtle, or even, like, Tomo and Diamond, or whatever, right? As if Wild Turtle would be an upgrade to Spawn, which I don't agree with. I think Wild Turtle has shown in Academy this year that he's not a very good player right now. But let's just say Tomo and Diamond, for example. Putting Tomo and Diamond on this team does not fix every problem that it has. You could make a real argument that Santorin has been bottom 1, but at best, probably bottom 2 junglers in the LCS so far this year. He has not been good. I want you to find me one play that Jensen has made this year that has been, like, actively aggressive and game controlling, because I have yet to watch him do that. Like, I understand these players are good, and perhaps with a better system around them and, with better mental, they could perhaps do some things, but pretending like the only problem with Dignitas right now is Spawn and Biofrost is just not true. Like, it is just a gross oversimplification of the issue at hand. I hate to be the one to talk about this, but this is what LCS teams do. This is what organizations do, is they look at a team like this and they go, oh, Spawn must have been the problem, and then they spend a lot of money to replace Spawn, and then they're still bad the next year. This is what Immortals has been doing for 7 years, right? Like, this is the mentality that keeps teams trapped in low elo forever, is not being able to objectively look and say, it's more than just one person. The scapegoat is not the only problem in any situation. Spica was not who made TSM bad last year. You know, Spawn is not the only person making Dignitas bad this year. Is Spawn playing bad? Yes. If you took out Spawn and just put Tomo, if you took out Spawn and Biofrost and just put Tomo and Diamond in, is this team top 6? No, they're not playing like top 6. Santorin is a bottom 1 jungler right now. Armut, you know, for as well as he played this game, this was his only good game of the split so far. Jensen has played so passively and so boringly in the mid lane, he's not winning anybody any games. So no, I don't think that if you just replace Spawn, Dignitas all of a sudden turns around and becomes a good team. This team is doomed from their mentality right now, and they have the talent to be able to get out of this, but pretending like Spawn is the only issue is not going to help this team actually get better. And so that's my little rant on Dignitas right now. Anybody who's just saying that it's one player causing a team to go 0-6 in the LCS, I don't know what to tell you. I don't know what to tell you. So yeah, Dignitas is bad. Outlook-wise, I don't think they're going to get better until some sort of mentality change happens. I don't know if that's a player swap. I don't know if that's just like everybody getting out of here. Like, right now, their mental is completely broken. You're watching these comms. They post their comms in their post games, and you're seeing Spawn not say a single word the entire game because he's tilted out of his mind. You're seeing Jensen barely talk. You're seeing Santorin barely talk. This team just feels like Excel. Like, I hate to say, like, that's the comparison I want to make, is it just feels like everybody on this team knows they can't win games, and so they're not winning games. And it just, I don't really know what the fix to that is. They're the worst team in the LCS, and I don't really see a lot of ways for that to change soon. For Team Liquid, again, you're very lucky that you ran into Dignitas. This feels like a team that is still very much on the cusp of even being relatively good. Feels like the top 4 are all very solidified. Team Liquid is very much not in that top 4. They are probably on paper better than a lot of the other teams that are competing for playoffs right now, but that's an assumption. We're really making an assumption on that because there are still many, many things on this Team Liquid team that bother me. Summit's still playing like an absolute madman and not in a good way. Pioshik is not particularly good right now. He's certainly not in the upper half of junglers in the LCS. Harry's just kind of been met in the mid lane. And Yan and Core have been really good. I think this bot lane have definitely been the driving force. Hopefully they can continue to grow. Yan can continue to grow into one of the better ADCs in the league. I think if that happens, TL has a chance to be in that top 4 or top 5. But as it is right now, they're just kind of a team without a lot of direction that is okay at best. That's going to bring us to our final game here of Week 3 LCS action, and we closed it off with an interesting one between Immortals and Golden Guardians. And Golden Guardians pick up a win here. Very, very nice. A 2-0 week coming out from the winless Golden Guardians going into week number 3. That's definitely a pretty good sign. They've had a very, very tough road up till this point. They basically already played all of the top teams, and so for them to be sitting here at 2-4, it's certainly not the worst thing in the world. You could say the same thing for Immortals. They have a couple of more games that they got to play against some top teams, but good win for Golden Guardians. They honestly just looked incredibly solid in this game. Basically everybody looking good on the side of GG. I think there were quite a few people you could theoretically give player of the game to here. I think Broadcast gave it to Stixay, and I totally understand that. A really good game from him on the Kalista. He had a very sneakily great week. I think a lot of people are going to want to give it to Gory on the Sylas, who just continues to prove that he is one of the best mid laners in the entirety of the LCS. But for me, I'm going to give it to River in the jungle on the Sejuani. 96% KP. It really should have been 100, but it timed out before, I believe it was Ablaze Olive died in that mid lane matchup. Just a really nice showing from a jungler who honestly has had a pretty good start to the year. This is kind of very similar to what we saw out of River on Dignitas at the beginning of last year in spring. I know I talked a lot about River in summer kind of being a hindrance towards that Dignitas team and then eventually coming over and not particularly making Golden Guardians better when he was on it, but you know, River in spring has been a positive in the LCS before, and it seems to be a positive again. He's actually been, I would say, hugely beneficial towards Golden Guardians in both of their wins. It seems like him and Gory do have relatively relatively good chemistry together. Obviously, that's going to be incredibly important. You're looking at probably your two most talented players on the team in your jungle mid duo, hopefully being able to connect. It does seem like they are working together at a relatively good pace, and obviously River does a good job in this game being able to accelerate Gory, being able to accelerate bot lane in particular. I talked about this in the series before, earlier on in the week in day number 1. If this bot lane can perform, Golden Guardians can actually win a lot of games, and Stixxay and Huhi were really, really solid this week, not just in this game, but over the course of week 3, they were actually incredibly big for this Golden Guardians team, and that's a really good sign. Again, we know that River and Gory are talented players, and we know that they're going to be able to get some wins off of their belt, basically on their own, River and Gory, that is, but Stixxay and Huhi, Licorice, those are the players that we were really looking to see if they were going to be able to step up and be on that same level. Licorice still has a lot to prove to me, but Stixxay and Huhi are very much proving that they deserve to at least be considered on that level. This could very well be a team that competes for top 6, which is pretty crazy to say, considering the fact that they were winless going into this week. River and Gory are playing well. River on the Sejuani and things that can be really proactive in the early game have always been really solid. And then Stixxay and Huhi, I think, definitely showed that they can carry games actively from the bot lane in a meta where it's very important to be able to carry games from the bot lane. As for Immortals on the other side, frustrating loss here. You're sitting at 2-4, but I mean, we kind of know what Immortals is. They seem to be a little bit of the gatekeepers from the teams that are doing okay and the teams that are very much not doing okay. They were able to beat up on Dignitas. They were able to beat up on CLG, right? But even a team like Golden Guardians, they have way more going for them right now than those other teams do, and unfortunately, Immortals is just not able to handle them. I talked about how Kenvi has been the best player on this team. I definitely think that played into this as well. Kenvi had moments where he was looking like he was trying to set Immortals forward, but everybody else on the map just lost. Revenge was not nearly as good as Licorice in this game. Not a good sign. Tactical and Fleshy just lost to Stixxay and Huhi. Not a good sign. Blaze Olive really got run off the map in that mid lane matchup, especially when River started interjecting himself. That's a very bad sign. Blaze Olive's going to be my dud of the game here. He really has not been all that good for Immortals so far in 2023. Obviously not replacement worthy. I don't think that he has been like losing the game by himself, kind of player. I don't think he's necessarily been that for Immortals, but I would certainly not say that he has been a strength for this team, and that continued here. Going into one of the more interesting mid laners in the entire region in Gory, someone who theoretically could be like a top 1, 2, or 3 mid in the entire region if things are kind of going his way. I just need to see it a little bit more consistently. It's definitely a tough matchup. He got a lot of attention from the jungle. Sometimes it just happens. Blaze Olive is the dud of the game here, but I don't think anybody on Immortals played particularly well. It was just ABO that kind of stood out to me as someone who was playing a little bit too aggro, maybe for the situation that he was in. I continue to think that this bot lane is the part that needs to win in order for Immortals to win games, Tactical and Fleshy. Going into Stixxay and Huhi had such a good week that it was always going to be difficult for Tactical to be able to step up and be able to compete with that, and unfortunately in this game, he just was not able to do that. The Kalista was incredibly strong, and he fell behind early as the Lucian Nami, which is just never a good sign. Shout out to the BM Renata pick. I'm not exactly sure if that was BM, or if it was just kind of coincidence, I would say, in the long run. Obviously, that segment that ran, the very funny segment, I want to shout out the LCS team. This is a very good segment that ran before this game where Blaze Olive is talking about how narrow drafts have ruined him, and he was making him play Renata mid, and, whatever, right? And then they go and pick Renata. Kind of funny, and that they were able, especially if they were able to beat them on it. It is kind of funny, but it does suck for Immortals. Overall, outlook-wise, this team is exactly who we thought they were. They are a bottom-ish team. I'm not exactly sure they're bottom 2, because there are a couple of teams in the league right now that very much feel like they have no hope, but Immortals are certainly down there. They're not really a team that I would expect to be competing for top 6, even though they've been able to win a few games over the course of the last few weeks. I think that they are decent. They're going to be able to take out teams that are in a complete, free fall, that they're in a spiral, downward spiral, I should say, but they're probably never going to be able to compete on the same level as teams with actual talent like Golden Guardians has, and that's a good thing for GG. I mean, they've really inserted themselves into that playoff conversation, which is insane, again, because they entered the week winless, and so to go 2-0 this week, to end it 2-4, I mean, you're basically one game out of playoffs, which is a pretty good place to be. River and Gory seem to have nice chemistry together. The bot lane is definitely clicking. If top lane can just be a little bit more stable, a little bit less volatile, a little bit less inty, if I'm being entirely honest, then I think Golden Guardians actually is a team that teams will have to prep for, that teams will actually have to get ready to face, rather than being kind of the bottom tier team that I think we all maybe thought they were going into the week. All right, that is going to do it for my LCS Week 3 overview and analysis of all 10 games that happened across both days. Up on the screen right now, you're going to see the updated LCS standings. Of course, any ties will just be broken alphabetically. In the first column on the right, you're going to see my updated power rankings. In the second column on the right, you're going to see how those have changed from last week to this week. So let's go ahead and talk about the biggest risers and the biggest followers. The biggest riser this week, Golden Guardians, going 2-0, an incredibly good week for them, jumping up from number 10 in my power rankings to number 7. Obviously, I was wrong for putting them at number 10. I did not believe in this bot lane. Even if Gory was good, I thought River was a little bit too hit or miss for me. Licorice had been playing really bad. The bot lane wasn't particularly playing well. I thought there were too many issues for me to believe that this team was going to be competitive. I was very wrong about that. The bot lane really stepped up, and River actually played phenomenal this week. Definitely both of them, actually. River, Stixay, and Hui, all three of them in contention for player of the week for me, and that means that they jump up to number 7 in my power rankings, right outside of the top 6. I mean, 5 basically to 10 are all relatively speaking within range. Really 5 to 9 are all relatively speaking within the same range, and I think Golden Guardian sitting at 7, if they just continue moving on the way they are, they could be at 6 very soon. TSM also jumps up to 6. Evil Geniuses jumps up to number 2, leapfrogging Cloud9 after beating them, and those are your risers. Obviously, biggest follower of the week. Not really going to be a surprise. It's going to go to CLG, falling from number 6 in my power rankings to number 9. They just do not look good right now. I genuinely think that they look like a bottom 2 team in the LCS. Hopefully they don't keep this up because they are a very fun roster to talk about and a very fun roster to watch, and I do think there's a lot of talent on the team, but it is just not coming together right now, and right now they very much do look like a bottom 2 team, right along with Dignitas, who does fall down to number 10, and then, of course, Cloud9 falling down to number 3. So those are your movers. FlyQuest stays at 1, Team Liquid stays at 5, 100 Thieves stays at 4, Immortals stays at 8. Don't really feel like I need to talk about that all too much. Of course, now we get to talk about our player of the week and our dud of the week. My player of the week, again, no surprise to people who watch games this week. It's going to go to Prince on FlyQuest. He was just so freaking good. He's the best player in the LCS, and he continues to prove it game after game after game. He's super fun to watch, and all I can really say about Prince is that I hope he keeps it up. I think if he's able to continue to be the best player in the league by a lot, maybe one of the best players the league has ever seen, then this is a FlyQuest team that is genuinely going to be very difficult to see being taken down, and that's very, very fun to watch. I think other players that were in consideration, River, Stixay, Huhi, like I already said, basically all of Golden Guardians playing really well this week in that same vein. My dud of the week, this one was a lot easier. This one is going to go to Spawn on Dignitas. He just continues to look like the weakest player in the LCS. He's just not good enough to be at this level right now. Not only is he really not mechanically talented enough to be able to get over a lot of the shortcomings that he has in lane or the rest of the team is having right now, but also he's mega tilted, and so his play's even worse than it normally would be. So Spawn is just not in a position right now where he needs some time to regain his confidence, maybe in a lower league, because it is just not working for him right now. So Spawn's my dud of the week here in week 3. Prince is my player of the week, but that's gonna do it. I hope you guys enjoyed. If you did, let me know down in the comment section below. What do you think of my power rankings? Who is too high? Who is too low? Do you want to see Golden Guardians in the top 3? I've seen people be incredibly excited about this team, so let me know that. Who else is too high? Who is too low? I love to hear you guys' thoughts, of course, down in the comments. If you are new, hit that subscribe button. Not only do I do LCS content, I do NACL content for those North American fans out there, but I also do weekly recaps of the LEC, the LPL, the LCK, all of the major regions. So if you're interested in any of that, hit the subscribe button, and of course, if you made it this far, hit the like button. It really does mean a lot. It shows me you guys are enjoying the content after all. But of course, with all that being said, I hope you all are having a great day. I hope you continue to have a great day, and I will see you all later.